It was 1972, a Tuesday in Memphis. Outside Graceland, the magnolia trees stood perfectly still, the way they always did before something heavy happened. Inside, a record spun on the turntable, one of Elvis's own songs, but the man himself sat motionless in the corner of the room, elbows on his knees, hands folded under his chin, staring at the floor. He didn't sing along. He never sang along that night. And those who were there, his cousin Billy Smith, two members of the Memphis Mafia, would later say it was the strangest thing they had ever witnessed. Because Elvis Presley always sang. He sang in the car. He sang in the kitchen. He sang while he was half asleep. Music wasn't something Elvis did. It was something Elvis was not until it wasn't. What had happened in the hours before that? Tuesday silence was something the tabloids would try to decode for decades. But the people closest to him would whisper only one name when asked what broke the king's voice that night: Priscilla. They met in Bad Nauheim, Germany, in 1959. Elvis was 24 and serving in the U.S. Army, a rock and roll king forced into a uniform, his career on pause, his mother freshly in the grave. He was in the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just empties you out quietly, day after day, until you can't remember what you felt like before it. Priscilla Beaulieu was 14. She walked into a party at a friend's house wearing a blue sailor dress, and the moment Elvis saw her, something in the room changed temperature. Everyone there felt it. The stories vary in small details, but every single witness agrees on one thing. Elvis didn't look away from her for the rest of the night. He was drawn not to her beauty alone, though she was striking in the particular way that 14 looks both younger and somehow older than itself. He was drawn to her calm. Priscilla had a stillness to her, a self-possession that Elvis had never found in the women who threw themselves at him from the audience. She looked at him like she was deciding whether he was worth her time. He found that intoxicating her stepfather, Captain Joseph Beaulieu, was understandably cautious. A grown man, the most famous pop star in the world, wanted to spend time with his teenage daughter. But Elvis was persuasive and patient in a way that surprised everyone who knew him. He wrote letters. He called at appropriate hours. He charmed the Beaulieus at Sunday dinners until they started to see him not as Elvis Presley the phenomenon, but simply as a respectful young man who happened to sing. What neither parent fully understood, what perhaps no one in that era was equipped to understand, was that Elvis wasn't just courting Priscilla. He was constructing her. From the very beginning, he told her how to dress, what shade to dye her hair, how high to wear her heels. He loved the idea of her as much as he loved her, and she, young and dazzled and desperately in love, let him. For years she let him. By the time she moved to Graceland at 17, the gold cage was already built. She just didn't know it yet, because the bars were made of devotion. Life at Graceland was beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. Priscilla would say this herself years later, with the measured language of a woman who had spent decades making peace with a story that never entirely felt like her own. The house was magnificent. The security was ironclad. And the loneliness was the kind that grows loudest at 3 in the morning, when the man you love is asleep pills deep and you're 22 years old with nowhere to go, and no one to call. Elvis was away constantly. Las Vegas seasons, film shoots, tours that stretched for months. Priscilla kept the house, kept herself poised, kept her hair in the style he liked. She waited, and she waited, and she was very good at waiting, because no one had ever told her she had the right to do anything else. When Elvis was home, it was electric. He was funny in the way that very intelligent people who have never had to think about money tend to be funny, effortlessly, almost carelessly. He filled a room with warmth the moment he entered it. He loved Priscilla physically, emotionally, in ways that felt total. But he also refused to let her exist as a person outside of him. She had no career. She had no friends he hadn't approved. She had no world that wasn't the world he had built around her like a beautiful, gilded wall dot. Then Lisa Marie arrived in February 1968, and something shifted. Motherhood gave Priscilla something that Elvis couldn't edit or control: an identity. She loved her daughter with the furious, clarifying intensity of someone who had been waiting their whole life to belong to themselves through belonging to another person. Lisa Marie was hers in a way that nothing else at Graceland ever had been. The marriage, by most accounts of those present, was quietly deteriorating by 1969. Elvis's addictions were deepening. His moods were becoming harder to navigate. The Memphis Mafia surrounded him like a wall of yes-men who would never tell him the things he needed to hear. Priscilla began to look for something. She didn't know what. She signed up for a karate class in Los Angeles. It was the first choice she had made for herself in nearly a decade. That karate class would change everything. Because in that class, she met Mike Stone. And Priscilla, for the first time in her adult life, made a choice that Elvis had not scripted for her. In January 1972, Priscilla told Elvis the truth. She sat across from the king of rock and roll, the most desired man in the world, the man who had shaped her like clay since she was a child, and she told him she was in love with someone else. She told him she was leaving. No one who loved Elvis Presley was ever supposed to leave him. That was the unspoken rule of Graceland, of the whole mythology. Women left Elvis in tabloid stories, in sad songs, in movies. In real life, you didn't leave Elvis. You stayed and you adjusted, and you were grateful for what you had. That was the arrangement. Priscilla broke the arrangement. Elvis's reaction has been described many ways by many people. His cousin Billy Smith said Elvis went completely still, not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of a man whose entire internal architecture had collapsed and left nothing standing. His bodyguard, Red West, said Elvis cried in a way that was frightening to witness, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so genuinely broken, so far removed from performance. And then, in the days that followed, he stopped singing, not entirely, not permanently. He still performed. He still showed up to the Las Vegas shows in the jeweled jumpsuits, still hit the notes that sent 10,000 people into delirium. But those who knew him really knew him, said the singing had changed. There was something behind it that wasn't there before. A heaviness. Like a man carrying something invisible that the audience couldn't see but could feel without knowing why they felt it. At home, at Graceland, the silence was total. He stopped singing to himself. He stopped humming in the kitchen. The turntable played other people's music, and Elvis Presley sat in the corner of his own house and listened to someone else's voice fill the room that used to be full of his own. Some have called what Priscilla did brave. Others have called it betrayal. The truth, as it usually does, lives somewhere in the bruised territory between. She did the unthinkable. She chose herself. And in doing so, she shattered the man who had chosen her, and who had never quite let her choose. Elvis and Priscilla finalized their divorce in October 1973. Photos from that day are some of the most studied images in American celebrity history. They walked out of the courthouse together, side by side, and Elvis smiled the kind of smile that takes everything you have to produce. Priscilla smiled too, and they held each other briefly in front of the cameras. Two people who had shared the most intimate years of their lives, now standing in the California sunlight as two separate people for the first time. What happened to Elvis after the divorce is a story most people think they know. The weight gain, the prescription pills, the concerts that became increasingly erratic, the death in August 1977 at 42 years old on the bathroom floor of Graceland. The world mourned in the way it always mourns the beautiful dead, loudly, then moving on. But people who were close to him in those final years describe something that doesn't fit neatly into the standard narrative of excess and decline. They describe a man who had genuinely lost his compass. Not just his marriage, not just his romantic partner, but the person who had been, in his own complicated, controlling way, the organizing principle of his private self. He had built Priscilla, and then she had walked away. And without her, he couldn't seem to rebuild himself. There's a recording from a late concert in 1975, a bootleg, circulated among collectors, where Elvis stops mid-song. The band keeps playing. The audience waits. And Elvis stands at the microphone for a long moment, not speaking, not singing, just standing there. Then he laughs softly, says something no one can quite make out, and starts the song over from the beginning. Older and slower, but he finishes it. Priscilla, for her part, rebuilt herself with a thoroughness that Elvis never managed. She built a business, a career, a public life that was entirely hers. She raised Lisa Marie. She became, in ways that would have been unimaginable to the 17-year-old who moved into Graceland herself. She still speaks of Elvis with love, but she speaks of him the way you speak of a country you once lived in, with fondness and gratitude, and the firm knowledge that you could never go back. The silence that fell over Elvis Presley in the winter of 1972 never fully lifted. Not because Priscilla left him, but because in leaving, she proved something he had never been forced to confront, that love cannot be controlled, that the thing you build to keep someone close can become the very thing that drives them away, and that some silences, once they begin, echo longer than any song. Two people, one legend, no clean villains, no perfect victims, just the old story of love that tries to own what it can only ever borrow. Elvis gave Priscilla a world, and Priscilla gave Elvis a mirror he wasn't ready to look into. What he saw in that mirror silenced him in ways no critic ever could. We still hear his voice on the radio. We have never heard the silence it cost him. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves Elvis, and tell me in the comments, whose side are you on?